the stronger the emotion that we feel from some external event in our life, the more altered we feel inside of us as a result of that condition outside of us, the more we pay attention to the cause. And the brain narrows its focus on whatever it is that's sitting there, and it freezes an image and it takes a snapshot. And that's called a memory. So the higher the emotional quotient, the more fear, the more pain, the more shock, the more anger, whatever it is, the more we pay attention to the cause. And so then we create long-term memories that way. Now the challenge is that every time we think about that trauma, we're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as if it was happening again. So some people, after an event like that, are literally re-experiencing it 100 times in one day. And this is a crazy thing, because what it does is it activates the survival gene. And when you're in survival, what you want to do is make sure that that doesn't happen again. So what you start to do unconsciously is you start to begin to forecast what you'll do if it happens again, right? And you start selecting a worst case scenario in your mind. And then you think, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you start to even make it even more, you get more creative, right? And every time you do that, you start experiencing the emotion of that future based on the pain of your past, the fear of your past, the anxiety of your past, the depression of your past. And so the person's conditioning their brain and body into the past, and at the same time, they're literally bracing themselves for the worst case scenario in their life, because in survival, if you prepare for the worst, there's better chances of survival. And you could have 10 really great things go on in your life, and you could have one bad thing, and you keep focusing on that one bad thing because you got to be prepared for it happening again. So people unconsciously then spend their whole life looking around the corner, waiting for it to occur, and they're on guard. Now, that's not a conscious process.
Common in PTSD from soldiers. They're
common.
Constantly looking for the roadside bombs, and they're highly elevated, and it's very it's unconscious a lot of times.
What they're doing is when you're in that brainwave state, you're sweeping your environment to determine if there's anything out of order. And you're doing that because the brain is on such an aroused state. In survival and stress, the brain is in a very alert state, and the brainwave patterns are high beta. You're super aroused, you're super alert, because you're vigilant about one thing out of pattern that looks unusual or unrecognizable. And the moment you see that, it's that thought that opens the door to the conditioning that you've been creating all along. Remember, this is not a conscious process. It's no different than ringing a bell and watching a dog salivate. The stimulus is also causing an autonomic, physiological, chemical change that's taking place in the person's body. And that person literally, from a biological standpoint, is back in that event.
Right.
And they're going to behave in almost the same way that they did then, because they're trapped in survival, right?
Right, and like you said, that's a snapshot. A lot of people never ended up talking about that event because there's a shameful process there. So it literally stays there.
You're frozen.
You're frozen.
You've stopped, from that point forward, you've stopped evolving. What we're saying is that if you can't overcome that emotion, then you can't create anything new, because that emotion is keeping you tacked to the past, right? So then
your whole future is written. Then it's
done. Yeah,
it's done.
It's done. You're in a box, right? You're in a box. So what we know, according to functional scans, is that talking about it helps to diminish some of the emotions, but it doesn't really change the brain or body that much. You can talk about it. You can have some insights, but until you begin to make fundamental changes, you're not going to go anywhere. We also know that when a person is in an environment that's remotely familiar to the event, even to the smallest measure where they can associate something, a small little trigger, they're going to have that same emotion consume them, literally consume them. So the problem is not that it's just in the brain, Brian. The problem is it's in the body as well, because it's the emotion that's conditioning the body subconsciously into the past. And now we're 5% conscious mind, 95% subconscious mind. So then that becomes a very profoundly distinct program for that person. So they lose interest in any other thing that is not related to the emotion they're experiencing. In fact, no new information can enter their nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion that they're experiencing because it's not relevant. Right. They're in survival. Survival says, be prepared for what's about ready to happen. Be prepared for the worst. Be ready. Don't let it get you this time. Know what you're going to do, and it's usually, a very primitive reaction.
Right. So you're not present. You're not evolving. You're not open to any new emotions or anything.
Right. So there's been great research done on different energy psychology techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. I've seen the scans. People will begin to recall the event and the emotion starts to lose its charge. Now, a memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. Now you're free from your past, right? But it's not the conscious mind that's involved, that the REM movement, the eye movement in EMDR is simulating REM sleep, and you're able to consolidate memories differently that people with trauma sometimes don't dream, or they dream the same dream. EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping and associating it with certain emotions, kind of like a psychological acupuncture, tends to release energy out of the body, and it lowers cortisol levels significantly. The meditation, a lot of times, when you can give people the proper instruction and set up the conditions in their environment where they feel safe enough, that for me, it's never about the event. The event is incidental. It's about the emotion. Right. So then when you start lowering the volume to that emotion and you teach a person how to get beyond their analytical mind, enter the operating system where those subconscious programs exist, change their brainwaves and begin to make significant changes. When they start making those subconscious changes, they're less reactionary. You teach them how to find the present moment. You teach them over time the tedium of returning back to the present moment and managing their attention, managing their energy. And you are literally training an animal that has really poor manners. The body's been just conditioned to be like a feral animal that's in survival, but when you start working with it and you keep settling it down, you're breaking that conditioning response and you're telling it it's no longer the mind of anger, that you're the mind. And then this is where David starts slaying Goliath. This is where every time you start doing that, in the beginning it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. But if you keep practicing, we have so many brain scans to show so many people healing from anxiety and depression. You can't be anxious if you're in the present moment. You can't be depressed if you're in the present moment. You're in the present moment. You're not thinking about the future or the past, and you start managing that world, then the body that's holding on to that emotion, when it finally gets trained, like training an animal to sit. If you're working with it, sooner or later, if you keep telling it and training it to sit, sooner or later it's going to acquiesce. Sooner or later it's going to surrender to another mind. And when that happens, boom, there's this liberation of energy.